Hello, pals. Welcome back. So, today I'm going to introduce you to somebody absolutely fascinating. You're probably aware that the UAP Files has a Discord where we all jump in and join and share our thoughts and opinions on a wealth of different topics, from military black projects to favourite cases to CE5 to rampant speculation. And we have one or two people in there that are a bit of a dark horse. One of which is known as Tsukuyomi137, and he's been posting for about a year. And you know, when you watch Jesse Michaels and he collects all the breadcrumbs and he knows the dates, the people, the letters, the programs, the projects. Well, Mr. Tsukuyomi137 was doing exactly that, and a phenomenal job of it. His knowledge of the secret history of this topic is frankly unparalleled. So I got speaking to him, and he is actually called Maximilian Petre, and he's in the process of writing a substack, which is the most comprehensive, in-depth, secret history of ufology I have ever seen. So he agreed to do two things for me. The first one is kind of an introduction where we were just having a good chat, and I had a great time, and I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. We cover things like To the Stars Academy, John Podesta, the motivation, why things are kept secret. It's a real roller coaster ride, and an hour shot by. So what we're going to do in part two is he's actually going to talk us through this Substack article, which features letters and discussions from physicists and scientists and all sorts of people throughout the history of this topic. And it is an essential study guide. So today we're going to dive into the history, and it's a bit more conversational. I mean, frankly, I was just fascinated by the contents of his head, and we got on really, really well. So I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. I won't take up any more of your time, but I hope you're all doing amazing, and I'll see you soon. Well,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, oh man, this is a real treat. I mean, how long have you been in the UAP Files Discord now? It's got to be a while.
Um, Probably maybe a year, I guess.
A
Maybe a little
year.
more, a little less.
I know this probably sounds very flattery, but you are consistently excellent with the things that you post in there. I mean, everybody seems to have a split off interest, whether it's like the spiritual side or the
Yeah.
scientific side, but you just throw this huge blanket over all of it, and you're really detailed in your investigations as well. So
Thank you very much. Thank you.
well, it's a massive asset to the whole community in there. I mean, you know, you can see yourself whenever you post something, one of your observations or a reference to a historical fact or something like that, it always starts off a great conversation. So
Yeah,
it's much
well,
appreciated.
I try to be as neutral as possible, but sometimes I end up pretty polarizing because I, I mean, I've done quite a lot of research on the subject, and I have these small triggers, that from time to time, I end up pretty polarizing. But yeah, thank you very much. It feels good to hear that.
Yeah, I know it's massive. So I mean, an obvious question is, what are those triggers?
The triggers. Yeah, well, the biggest one is, having to do with the general narrative that some people are trying to push, and mostly I'm talking about the To the Stars Academy.
Yeah.
And they're good people, they probably have best intentions at hand, most of them, anyways. But as far as Tom DeLonge is concerned, yeah, I kind of, I mean, even my last comment on the podcast, I kind of went a little bit into that. It's the fact that the guys who kind of brief him, I don't think that are the type of people whom you would take their information at face value. Um, when it's the type of, you know, things that not even certain presidents are briefed on, but somebody like Tom DeLonge is just all of a sudden called into skiffs and stuff and is given this information from people who run special projects, basically. And he says, well, I have no reason to not believe them because they don't seem to be counterintelligence, they seem to be regular intelligence. But it doesn't work like that. With this subject, it's always counterintelligence is always there, So yeah, the general narrative, it's like NHI, is real, but it's like a real threat, and that thing is the driving force between the behind the secrecy and the cover-ups, and because it's a grave threat, and they're ill intent. They're here to kind of get us, and invasions and alien bases and whatever, which, if you kind of go in depth the subject, as well as historically, if you go as far back as 1930s, 40s, 50s, there's not a lot to substantiate that really. As I kind of say, it may be enough to account for maybe 10-15% of the phenomenon, I think, but mostly we're dealing with something that is either benign or downright positive. So, because the kinds of people who would say that it's a big threat are usually the types of people who end up working with these black projects and getting the money and so on and so forth, it's kind of difficult to believe them. And because how many more trillion would you need? The Department of Defense has an average budget annually from starting from like 700 billion to 1+ trillion, right? That's an annual budget. So even if 10% of that goes to black projects, and then 20% of that goes to these unacknowledged special access programs, we're still talking about, multi-decade speaking, we're talking about 2 or 3+ trillion, I think. It's my personal estimate. So we're talking about a shitload of money, and I can't really believe that they would need more, and the secrecy can still be justified within the current state of where we're at, and of course, I can understand their point of view, if you're the biggest, the most powerful country in the world, and there's sudden, well, this is another thing. It's not a sudden thing. It's been here for a very long time, and some of them are trying to make it seem like it's kind of this recent thing when it's not. And if they were really here to get us, they would have probably done it a long time ago. They wouldn't have waited for us to, wouldn't have waited for us to possibly pose a threat to them, in defense or whatever. So
Totally
most,
agree. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, sorry. So on the other side, you have Stephen Greer, who's like, all NHI is peaceful, all NHI is benevolent, and for the most part, I tend to rather align with that view. But the phenomenon is so diverse and it's so vast that really, among all the potential species and whatnot, surely there's a few bad apples, if I can call it that. But mostly, I think it ends up being quite a good thing for people who have an experience, even though at the beginning it might be traumatic or, you know, and just to end it, the last kind of thought. Another thing that I don't see that the guys from TTSA like to talk about is reverse engineered technology or highly advanced technology in the context of military abductions. They really don't like to talk about that. And when you look at the structure of how it works, with the Special Access Program Oversight Committee and the Launches Advisor, General Neil McCasland, and with those sorts of people, it's kind of the same people who protect these special access programs, involving highly, highly advanced technology that also interact with UFO groups, and researchers and people who try to get in on the subject. So I kind of find it hard to take it at face value, considering that they will not address this aspect, which I think is very, very important. Military abductions have been documented, I think, for many decades now, and we have people, including Jacques Vallée and Stephen Greer, everybody knows about. But even Jacques Vallée, few people know that he's actually stated multiple times that cases, especially cases after 1985, but even those after 1975, should first be analyzed as military hoaxes or military operations disguised as UFO sightings. which I think is it's quite a critical question to ask because again, it kind of winds back to the money question and to the whole extent of how much actually has been done to research this and to get to the bottom of it. And personally, I think a lot has been I think a lot has been done and quite earlier than people would suspect. Nowadays, the narrative is mostly like, yes, NHI exists, UFOs are real, aliens are real. We have some technology, we have some craft, but we don't really understand anything. It's very compartmentalized, it's very stovepipe, as Mr. Eric Davis likes to say. And we need more scientists on it. We need more of this and that, which to a certain degree I agree with. But I think again, when you look at the history, how rich it is and how old it is, and how much money has been pumped into this, it's impossible. I think impossible to consider that some group somewhere within various factions of this military-industrial complex hasn't really gotten quite far with these things. So yeah.
There are so many threads I want to pull from what you've just said.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I may be
first
all
of
over
all,
the place. I apologize to you and to potential viewers. I might be all over the place because my head is kind of exploding at times with various threads. But yeah,
no, I think it's amazing, and yeah, no, I'm. It's just everything you've said. I totally agree with. To begin with,
yeah,
so to wind it back to the stars in particular, I think that's a really interesting place to start because it's these historical figures acting with a new face, and I think
yeah,
that's something worth unplugging. Now, first of all, there was an interview on James Landoli's channel last week with Jim Semivan and Peter Lavender,
yeah.
who
I've
wrote,
seen around 40 minutes of that or so. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's a lot that we've heard before from them, but it's still incredibly relevant.
yeah. Sure, sure.
And at one point, they both say that they don't know who Tom DeLonge's advisors were. Jim Semivan says that he guessed something like three of them, but he knows that there are others that Tom DeLonge's not told him. So,
Yeah.
have you got any further down the rabbit hole?
Well, they probably knew who his main advisor is, but they didn't want to name him because he's still actively employed. I think Major General Neil McCasland is commander of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Research Laboratory, the place where Eric Davis was also employed and may still contract for, who knows. Uh, he, he is his main advisor, and I think Peter Lavenda and Jim Semivan probably know. I mean, surely if we know this as the public, or at least if I know this, but Grant Cameron, I think, is maybe the first one who came out with the name. He outed General McCaslin. But yeah, it's kind of like a a matter of public record. I guess they just didn't want to touch upon that subject because it's a sensitive issue. Because General Neil McCaslin was former director of the director for special programs at what used to be called SAPCO, which nowadays I'm not sure what the current terminology for that is, but the Central Access Program, Central Office, Special Access
Okay.
Program, Oversight Committee, the same committee that stopped Admiral Wilson in his tracks and threatened him and whatever. So it's those kinds of positions are very sensitive because I think, in my opinion, as far as my research has been able to shed some light on, is they act as kind of like an interface between the legacy group and other parts of the government and the public that might be trying to get inside. Most of them are also concerned with security, even though they might be intelligence related personnel. They are well versed in security as well and counterintelligence and stuff like that. So they're always on the lookout for that. But there's always been across time, there's always been this kind of like drip fed, disclosure and people from within, deliberately leaking information, which is definitely the case with Tom DeLonge, with Bob Lazar, and with a couple other people. But the difficulty in really getting down to the bottom of it is the details, and the saying, the devil's in details. So that's where we kind of it gets a little bit difficult. Yeah,
I think that's a perfect point. Yeah. Interested that you mentioned Bob Lazar. I think he's telling what he believes to be the truth.
for sure, for sure. He
But do
did
you
seem
think he's been fed, 80% real information that they want to come out and then 20% nonsense to discredit him if they ever need to?
well, look, the fact is that they couldn't have just taken anybody. He needed to have a little bit of to be a little bit believable in the sense that it's a matter of fact that he can be found in Los Alamos phone book records, right? So he was employed there for a short time, but he should not, from my point of view and other researchers' points of view, he should not have had the type of clearance that would have allowed him to get briefed into that subject, which then kind of leads one to believe that, well, they kind of picked him before, they were like, okay, this guy, he's kind of in the air, he might be working whatever he was working there, let's say we don't know what he was working there, but whatever, even if he was but obviously he wasn't just a janitor because he does have a pretty decent grasp, I guess, of physics and I guess science in general, whatever. So they're like, okay, we're gonna pick him. We're gonna get him into this vault. They took him into skiffs. It's kind of a factual thing that he was brought into skiffs, and they gave him documents. They basically made him sit down at the table, and they're like, take a look at these documents. And I am not certain, what exactly he saw with his own eyes and what exactly he read about. I think he must have seen some craft, right? Some craft because obviously he needed to be really believable, and in the way that he came forward he was 100% believable. His body language, everything, checks out. He 100% believes what he's saying. So obviously if you're going to do this type of operation, you want to make it as believable as possible, and you do want to give that person some insight. And I think it was both. I think it was visual as well as intelligence related, with files and documents. But of course, then we get into the details, of how much is factual and how much isn't factual, and then it's a whole different question. And to which I could say, well, it doesn't really matter, how much is factual because you have a core story, core narrative which holds and which multiple people, across decades have confirmed and contributed to. So it doesn't even matter. In the case of Balazar, it does. I don't think it matters, how much of it is factual or not. It matters that the core story is true, in my opinion. He was there. He was brought into this project temporarily. He was shown things. He was given documents to read, and that's kind of it. You don't need to go further than that, I
I
think.
that's a perfect 3,000 foot view opinion of the entire topic, I think. Like people really argue over the niche minutiae of he said this, he said that, no, he didn't, he wasn't there at that time. But the thing is, if any aspect of it has any level of truth,
Yeah,
then we have to reevaluate our entire view of world
yeah,
history
for sure,
and our
for
role in
sure.
it. So I totally agree. This isn't a time to split hairs. It's just to, recognize
Yeah,
that it exists in the first place.
yeah,
So something that's puzzled me, and I'm basically just using you as an information mine right now,
for
but
sure, for sure.
how does John Podesta fit in? Because we've got presidents routinely being told, no, you don't get to know this stuff.
Yeah,
There are these key people that are, say Gang of Eight, Matt Gates, he knew
yeah,
about stuff with Eglin and stuff, but he
yeah,
was refused entry.
yeah,
The Eglin thing fascinates me. But then it would appear we've got John Podesta, who accidentally leaked through WikiLeaks, kind of validated the fact that DeLong was talking
yeah,
to him. How
yeah.
much would he know and how would he be involved? He's not a guy I know a great deal about.
Yeah, Podesta is a pretty interesting character. I know a little bit. The idea that he's been in the political scene for a very long time and he's campaigned for Bill Clinton, for Obama, then for Hillary. Some people say he was quite instrumental in their campaign. So he's been part of the infrastructure for a long time. we kind of know from Stephen Greer and the Starlight, what used to be called the Starlight Project, back in 1993 or 95, and the briefings that he had with former director of the CIA, what's his name? Yeah, he's been part of the political scene for quite some time. And knowing that the Clintons, I don't think they were very successful in getting into the trash retrieval program or whatever, seeing as, the head of the CIA was briefed by Stephen Greer at the time, so how much access could he have had if and I don't mean to downplay Dr. Greer. He's quite valuable. But anyways, it's kind of weird, a director being briefed. And there it was a briefing, even though the guy denies it, it was actually a briefing. They asked him many questions, and there were quite important people around in that meeting. But anyways, John Podesta, he's kind of a weird guy because I don't know if you know, but there's this thing he kind of has this alter ego, and I think the name of his alter ego is called Skippy or something like that. It's this weird thing where Skippy is kind of like an evil alter ego yeah, you can Google this. It's real. It's really weird stuff. So he may or may not have an alter ego that is evil, somehow evil or something like that. And he's an interesting character. I don't know what to say about him. He should know some things, I guess, but
Yeah.
I think he might be in one more person, kind of more or less acts as an interface between the outside world and whatever, inside. Legacy group. He might be that type of individual. He's pretty dubious at times, and no offense if anybody's watching, no offense to anybody, but yeah.
No, of course. I mean, from what I had heard attributed to him and his connections behind this, it kind of reminded me of that testimony that Harold Malmgren gave. You know, how he was just kind of the guy in the room a lot. And, someone's got to carry the note from
Yeah,
one
yeah,
room to another and stuff like that. So you would, if you're working in, I mean,
he would be in
I've
the
worked
perfect
in
position for that, I think. He would be in the perfect position for that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think that adds a bit of veracity, but it's almost like we are led to believe they sort of tried with DeLong that either panned out or didn't. That's
Mhm.
hard to
Yeah, I
say.
don't,
And then
sorry,
he's
sorry,
just
I'm
gone,
interrupting you. But
yeah.
I just remember something. I don't know if you know, but actually before DeLong wrote Podesta, Edgar Mitchell used to write him for quite a couple of years. I don't know if you probably don't. Yeah, it's part of the WikiLeaks emails. I just remember right now. So they did correspond for some time. We don't have the emails from Podesta to Edgar Mitchell, but we do have most of the emails from Mitchell to Podesta. And he was basically, pushing for full transparency, for bringing whistleblowers forward, and he was running with Dr. Greer at the time. But I don't know if people know or realize, but they had a really strong case, so to speak, built at that time. They already then had these kind of briefing documents that Greer nowadays sells, which I have no problem with because it's a lot of work, But they used to have these back then as well, and they did share them with a couple of people. But as far as I know, Podesta was kind of he put them a lot on the back burner, Edgar Mitchell and Dr. Greer. He didn't he kind of like he was the guy who used to stall. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna talk to you. We're gonna maybe do something, but in the end, I'm not gonna do anything, and you're just gonna waste your time. And Edgar Mitchell actually died without managing to unlock that pathway, so to speak, the Podesta pathway, which DeLong apparently managed to do, because I think the contacts that he gained at the Pentagon, mainly General McCaslin, might have been interfaced by Podesta somehow. I, I don't, I can't give you any details, but I think that might have been the case.
It's a possible link. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very. I mean, there's so many. So I have to apologize for kind of shotgunning all these different topics at you. But
no,
Edgar Mitchell opened isn't he the founder of a consciousness institute?
yeah, yeah, I think so. Yes,
I mean,
I think
that
so.
guy must have had quite a journey to
Yeah,
go, Air Force astronaut and then end up studying consciousness. I say a dark horse. I don't think it's intentional, but I don't think we know enough about
yeah.
him and what happened.
Part of the reason is that he is a very highly placed individual, and a lot of the online stuff has been shadow banned, so to speak. As far as he's concerned, many articles have been deleted. You need to always, go on archive and search up, links that are dead to, get the information. But he has given quite some interviews starting with around 97, 98. He started giving a few interviews up until his death, which are quite hard to find, But you have to dig quite a lot, which tells you a lot, I think.
It tells you it's
Um,
probably worth digging for, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but I agree. Not many people know, and I think part of the reason with the disinformation campaign, generally speaking, is the fact that he was associated for the most part with Dr. Stephen Greer, which is the most polarizing figure in ufology. So it might have had something to do with that. Dr. Greer was always kind of like a loose cannon, I think that's what they viewed him as. He was. I do believe he's a very intelligent individual, and he did a lot for the movement, and he still has a lot of contacts, but he's kind of like a loose cannon. He oftentimes tells things that he should not tell. And I actually believe him, he oftentimes says that, I've been told, this person told me, this highly placed person told me, don't go telling the truth, it's going to discredit you. It's because truth discredits itself, and when he says that, I actually believe him because it rings true, when you say things like that, some of them they do discredit you because they're just too wild. The world takes a long time to catch up with certain types of information. Given all the campaign, disinformation, and also the way that the phenomenon flows and whatever. It takes a lot of time for people to catch up. But yeah, interestingly, I think it's a very interesting thing that most of I've been watching him for a long since I started researching this, like UFOs and aliens and stuff around 2012. I've been watching. He was my first UFO researcher that I started following, so I've been watching him for kind of a long time, and it's really good to see most of the things that he talked about. That most people made him seem like mad, at the time, are kind of come to be true. So.
Yeah.
I like to defend him. I don't think he has many quality defenders, so to speak.
No,
I
I
think
agree.
I think that might be the case. But yeah, I try to take everything I can from everyone in the field. There's so many people in the field, and I think all of them have valuable information to offer. If we could just get over our preconceptions and our
Yeah.
whatever we think can be real or not. I think
Yeah,
that's
we've got this need for heroes and villains in the field, and like this guy's good and he only tells the truth, and this guy's a bad guy, and it's the truth is a lot more grey and nuanced
yeah.
than that. The things that you've said really reminded me of when I spoke to Grant Cameron. He talks about what he calls the golden child syndrome, where they
I'm not familiar with
give
the term.
information to a key person with a big public presence and they go up like a rocket with all of this new stuff that comes out from them, and then they self-destruct because they only pick people with a
Yeah,
certain character type. And when you look back through history, for example, Tom DeLonge, I mean, if you watch the first interview he did with um, Joe Rogan,
yeah,
at the time, he sounded crazy, and the internet was laughing at him. And oh, this musician, he's took too many drugs, and he's got listen to this guy. When you
yeah.
watch it now, with say 15 years of hindsight, he's saying the things that Diana Pazulka's saying, that Gary Nolan's saying, that Richard
It's true.
Dolan's saying, but I mean, TTSA blames lockdown and the pandemic for them losing all of their funding and not being able to make this anti-gravity craft that they were going to build under Chris Mellon's tutelage. But he seems to have lost a lot of steam in the last couple of years. We've gone from there was podcasters with t-shirts saying Tom was right on there to
Yeah,
now he's just not really in the game as far as the communication goes. And it's the same with Greer. Like Greer did more for this field publicly than anybody has done to this point, I think is a fair thing to say. I mean, the disclosure program, when you
Not
look,
looked at. It's not looked at, and it's huge. Yeah,
it's unbelievable. I mean, he got everybody from air traffic control to astronauts to literally everybody. And it wasn't, here's their new book, here's their new movie. It was just them testifying, hand on heart, saying, I'm prepared to say this under oath to Congress. And it all stacked. None of their testimonies um, contradicted each other.
yeah,
It
yeah.
was
Exactly.
mind-blowing work. So
Yep.
I totally appreciate that if you've just come into this field in the last 5 years, you're going to go, oh, who's this guy? People call him a grifter, and they
Yeah,
say he
exactly.
charges loads of money to do this. But, as
Yeah.
I've said in some of my other ones, there are key, there's a lot of people selling ticketed events now and a book.
Sure,
So, and
sure.
God, I know more than anybody that just doing podcasts and stuff does not pay the rent. So
Nope.
I don't begrudge anybody from trying to earn a living as long as they're putting the data first, and that's what Greer did.
Yes,
Um,
I agree. I agree.
so it's not fair to say, oh yeah, but he's a joke now because of the work he's done in the past, and it tracks with this Tom DeLonge, Stephen
It does.
Greer, Lou
It does.
Elizondo.
It's
Elizondo caused a bow wave when he first came out, and I would say to be optimistic and to play devil's advocate, if you like, against the rest of the internet, which has got pitchforks. He's proven to be quite volatile, which is not
yeah,
a criticism, which makes him easy to manipulate. And it would appear that, in the last 12 months, the guy's had the table legs kicked out from under him. And that tracks. That's just another Greer. That's just another DeLong, just another Bob Lazar, if you like.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's fascinating to me, the mechanism behind it and why they want a bit to come out and then put the thumb over the end of the hose.
Yeah, it's a quite effective tool if you think about it. You give the people, you deny stuff for a certain time, then you give them something, and if that something is well crafted, it's gonna, propagate for a long time, and you're gonna be able to, go back and do, whatever you were doing silently and in the comfort of your underground bases and whatever. I guess that's kind of the point, is somebody, I don't, unfortunately, I don't remember who, but it was somebody who kind of knew what he was talking about. He referred to the CIA as professionals in stalling, So I think part of the management of this subject, has to do with that. The best way to stall is to give people something, that is fairly accurate, decently accurate, but that fundamentally can't be, tracked necessarily exactly back to you or used as, a actionable intelligence, whatever. They will talk about it, they will debate it, they will for a long time until they eventually get tired of it. And I think this has worked excellently for about 60, 70 years now, but I think people are starting to have enough. And part of this is, I think, part of the reason why we've had a stronger whistleblower movement, starting 2023 with Dave Crush. It's been kind of a building momentum, so to speak, because, people are tired of, stories, which stories are good, they might as well be the real deal, they might as well be the full truth. But at the end of the day, it's still a story, it's not something that can put your hand on us unless it's, you're doing remote viewing or whatever, and viewing aliens, whatever.
Yeah, but
But
that's what Gary Nolan says about incidental data. He's like, okay, so we use the scientific method, and we go, oh no, that won't do. We'll just put that in a pile here. Oh, this is a witness account. No, that won't do. We'll put this in a pile here. And next thing, you've got nothing in front of you, and the giant mountain of what we call incidental or bad data or witness about reports or secondhand, hearsay. But the sheer volume of it has to be worth considering you know, without a so-called smoking gun, because we are in a position where we don't even know what a smoking gun would be at this
Yeah,
point. You know,
exactly.
if they wheel out the thing from Flight of the Navigator tomorrow, half the internet's going to go, "That's Lockheed Martin." You know,
Exactly.
another third's going to go, "That's a Chinese, secret project." It's so indefinable to actually know when they're going to land in the touchdown zone that
Yeah.
it just seems like a circle rather than a direct path.
Yeah, well, look, I think this leads back to the fundamental question, of why do these people, what is the ultimate agenda of the control group, And some would say that the control group is alien, that NHI manages the subject. I don't agree. I think it's mostly the military industrial complex, who's actually managing the flow of information. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the ultimate goal? What's the ultimate agenda? And some of them would have you believe that it's an intergalactic war. Some of them would have you believe that it's just, we're defending, building supremacy against the Russians, the Chinese, or whatever you want to, you know? So depending on who you ask, the agenda differs, but I think the common factor is that they're not really concerned about the welfare of, the general public and of people. I think that's kind of a common thread. So, if you consider that, then it's like, well, okay, you're hiding this probably because you want to hide misdeeds. Carl Nell speaks about this. Dave Grush spoke about this. You want to hide misdeeds, misappropriation of funds, protect, technology, whatever, and when you combine all of these things, it forms a picture, where, sure, you can dominate the world, but at what cost, because the people, you can't tell them, you can't ever tell them. The idea is that if this is true, and it's probably true in their minds, in most of their minds, you would never be able to tell people, to admit, at least that you have craft, for example. You would never be able to do that because then the questions would never stop coming, and then again, the trillions, what happened with the trillions, and what happened with this research, and with the, whatever,
Yeah.
have you been doing for 80 years? So that, I think, is the driving, core motivation behind maintaining the secret, together with all the other arguments, of maybe upsetting religion, maybe, probably not, but maybe upsetting religion, maybe, dangers of lawsuits against contractors who didn't get to work, on the technology, and all of the other, arguments, which I think are, less important than this core one, which is you can't admit that, you have it because you had it for a long time, and surely you must have done something with it. And if you would also admit that, then you open the floodgates, Pandora's box, and, you know, people just won't stop asking questions. So in this case, I think the only solution, the only thing that would I think would satisfy most people is if, somebody from within these programs, kind of
Was
goes
Rogue, yeah.
rogue, and basically somebody high up in the chain, that he's able to, provide physical proof of whatever kind. Ideally, you would take one of the flying triangles out of, Groom Lake or whatever. You would take it and land it on the White House lawn and say, "Well, look, this is what we have. We didn't fully do it ourselves. We got help, or, we got technology, maybe bits of it from somewhere else, but, we have this." And if something like this were to happen, it would satisfy many people, but then again, the questions still would not stop coming. But at least you would get to, manage the thing on your own terms. If you yourself or somebody, amongst you comes out with this thing, and at least you would get to manage the flow. The way that they're playing it is kind of a dangerous game, because if it's not them who do it, then it might be somebody other than them, and which means that they might fundamentally lose control. And I don't know that that's desirable, So I think it's kind of a very thin thread between, how much longer can we keep this secret, so that it doesn't blow up against us, and how much more do we need to accelerate disclosure, and how much more time do we have? And supposedly, if you're listen to, what some people say, it's probably we don't have that much longer until something happens, maybe 2027, maybe 2030, maybe something will happen. And so I think it's it's becoming a more and more difficult question, should we tell or should we not tell? And obviously the answer is yes, you should have told a long time ago. But the next best time is right now. And
Yeah.
if anybody's watching, the next best time is right now, and just do it. People have what it takes to understand, and people also have what it takes to forgive. They might have killed, presidents. They might have killed researchers. They might have killed physicists trying to get 0 point energy out and all sorts of things. They might have done this and that, but people can forgive, and at the end of the day, it always gets down to the baseline of, what it is to be human. And among the chief qualities of being human, I think, is being able to love and being able to forgive, and I think we have it in us, to get past the greed, to get past the pride and all of these negative things, and to actually take this earth into a new dimension, maybe. With their help, they can be at the head of this, at the helm of this, because they have been studying it for the longest time. And nobody, I think most people wouldn't want them locked up, wouldn't want them dead, wouldn't want anything like of that sort happen to them, right? But I think we just want more transparency, and we want it to come out, so that we have time to at least mentally, prepare, because something is probably going to happen, and the sooner the sooner that we get to know more, I think the more time we have to prepare for whatever might be coming.
That's very, very well said. I think there's there's a couple of things through history that for some reason, because my memory's terrible, but for some reason there are bits and bobs that just hook in there as that's important. And
Yeah,
Dolores Cannon, a very long time ago,
yeah, yeah.
said, I don't agree with everything that she said by any stretch, but there was one little snippet, and she said just offhand in one talk that they were annoyed because they'd given us a craft which was supposed to be free transport for everybody in the world, and we made a bomber out of it. And I was
Yes,
like, ooh, ooh, that's just, considering her and her background and not being interested in the military and all of that. And then you get things like, the B2 and all of these things that
for
we've
sure.
probably never seen. I thought
Yeah,
that was really interesting. The other is the Cash Landrum
yeah,
incident
yeah.
because Richard Dolan speaks at
I
length
think
about
that's
that.
1980, right?
That's right.
1980. Yeah.
That's right. But it was this big diamond shaped thing. I mean, it looked like if you've ever played The Sims, it's the icon above your head, this great big sort of
I
di
know, and it was conventional propulsion. It was combustion, I think.
well, Dolan was saying it was a nuclear reactor.
Yeah, okay, but it was still a combustion of sorts. I mean, it
And
was
it
still had a thrust, that
absolutely,
pulled it
yeah,
in the,
yeah, 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 yeah. It's
yeah,
still a thing burning stuff and
yeah,
squirting it out. But that it malfunctioned and it was
yeah,
being chased by helicopters and it irradiated Cash and Landstrom. But when you consider the historical context, like I'm in England and I'm a bit of a plane nerd, and we'd got the Vulcan bomber which was designed by the same designer of like the Lancaster bomber from World War II. It was designed to have atomic engines so that in a very Fallout style, it could fly more or less indefinitely, drop nuclear bombs wherever it needed to around the world. And the all that just died out. The whole idea of atomic propulsion, because I appreciate obviously you're not going to have an atomic car because cars crash and nobody wants
sure,
that.
for sure,
But
yeah,
in a military sense, I mean, for example, the F-117 is incredibly toxic and harmful, the stuff that's in the skin of it, because
yeah,
nearly everybody that worked on it died of cancer afterwards. So I can imagine fully because we already make atomic propulsion or power units for our satellites.
Mhm,
So I
mhm.
can definitely see that under the umbrella of the Atomic Energy Act and the DOE, we would have been trying to work on nuclear stuff. And then the next step is cool. Well, if we make it look like something super exotic, if it crashes in
For sure.
wherever land, then we just wash our hands and we've got nothing,
Yes,
no dirt on them. So
100% right. I think you're 100% accurate. I think that was the case. Historically speaking, as far as what some of the literature says, the craft at Roswell might have been either a nuclear fusion powered craft or somehow operating based on magnetic principles, but still, most people describe it as if it was a fusion type craft, right? So if that's true, then it means it kind of follows logically that the first prototypes would have been based on nuclear fusion, you know. And probably zero point energy was kind of a later comer in this infrastructure, so to speak. Um, and naturally so, you know, because it's much more difficult of a subject and more sensitive of a technology. But yeah, if that's the case, then, well, you know, personally, it's my opinion that the Cash Landrum case was a military project gone wrong, either intentionally or not. But yeah, you know, when you look, at least as far as I've, you know, studied the different cases, you know, you don't have traditional exhaust leaving, you know, a trail or, you know, burning the ground, or you would mo at most have, you know, radiation, ionizing radiation or whatever, you know. But craft that seems extraterrestrial but operates kind of on traditional um, frame within a traditional framework is not something that is described at all. I think it's one of the very few cases like that. So yeah,
yeah,
it might have
there's lots of
been.
cases where when it's really weird, and I'm obviously very much generalizing, but the really weird stuff where it will just disappear in a blink or change direction immediately,
Yeah,
it's always silent. And
yeah,
then you hear the cases of, oh, there was this, 3 football field sized black triangle over my house, and there was a sound like a transformer. They could hear
yeah,
this buzzing and stuff. And those are the cases, like, for example, there's a case of a guy whose TV started going weird. He walked outside, looked up, saw this triangle, heard a deep humming, and then he was irradiated from that. And it is clearly, to me, worthy of investigation that we've got something that makes a load of noise and hasn't got super exotic
yeah, yeah,
performance, and
for
then we've
sure.
got stuff that's silent, which is essentially magic as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. There's all these different degrees, you know, of technological development, and it kind of ties into the fact that, you know, there are probably multiple factions, at least two or three, you know, who design these craft, you know, who do it, who have their own way of doing it. I think there must be at least two or three, right? Different ones. Probably Lockheed, probably Northrop, probably Raytheon, I guess. Yeah, I think historically speaking, you know, flying saucer are kind of a flying saucers are kind of a thing of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Past the 60s, 70s, they're kind of they don't really occur that often anymore. And I think I think that was the first shape that they might have adapted, reverse engineered, or however you want to call it. And I think the next one was probably the triangle, you know, or the boomerang. I think, you know, it is my opinion. But it's interesting that, you know, the phenomenon changes. You know, when it was flying saucers, it was a very physical thing in the beginning. Then as you move along the decades, you know, it kind of changes, it morphs, and then you have more, you have different geometries. You know, you start having pentagons, hexagons, octagons, triangles, and all sorts of weird shapes. And then, you start having orbs of light that, change shape and morph and change color. And so I think as soon as we manage to adapt a certain geometry, right? I think the phenomena also adapts to give us something different, something more advanced, just to keep us on our toes. Uh, I
I
think
couldn't agree
to
more.
keep them on their toes, because I keep saying us. It's not us, it's them. Uh,
Yeah.
but, yeah,
No, I
yeah,
agree. I mean, I made a documentary looking at 100 years of sightings, and it started. Well, it was more than 100 years, but it started in the late 1800s, where they were seeing wooden sailing ships in the sky,
yeah, yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah,
you know, and then we get stuff shaped like an egg. Starting in sort of late 30s. And just like you were saying, then you get the classic 50s flying saucers, just as we were in the era of kind of saber jets and stuff like that. And so it always represents itself as impossible but probable,
yeah,
so that you can go, oh my God, a ship in the sky. How does that work? Or for
exactly.
example, a thing that looks like a Zeppelin turning up over Los Angeles and getting 15,000 rounds of flak fired at it, and
That's true.
it's not
Yeah,
bothered. It's impossible, but you can tell it's a thing, you know. Um,
for sure.
so it's almost like they keep us guessing just as much as our own governments are doing this kind
Keeps
of
us guessing.
drip drip disclosure
Exactly.
kind of thing.
That's a really nice way to put it. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Yeah, for sure.
Again, Grant Cameron and his theory of wow, I love that and I completely adopt that. But how it just kind of turns up, shows you something that you can understand the pieces to, but just doesn't go together, blows your mind, makes you go wow, and then all of a sudden your entire world changes and you're out there looking for a different way
Yeah,
of doing things. And I think that when you look at, to change a culture, speaking as somebody from England, where we in prehistory and the olden times, we were invaded that many times that we went from sort of pagan to Roman, and all of these different influences created the English language as much as anything else. There's bits of Latin and all sorts of stuff. But to change a belief system, that's quite a profound thing to do. And when you get from, say, Sumeria and Babylonia and Egypt, they all had these solid cultures. And then at some point, and it's not always through the destruction of a people, at
no,
some point that changes. So I think a big wafty question, if you like, is what causes those changes, and is this, related to that?
I think generally speaking, its empire is becoming progressively materialistic. I think very simply and briefly put, it's the idea that the foundation of these cultures is very metaphysical in its nature. And even democracy, when you look at it, where it comes from, Greece, it's very metaphysical in a sense. It's very artistic as well. But there, people back then, they always had multiple frames of reference for life. They did not simply take themselves to be this very gross physical body, just living on this rock that floats randomly through space-time, right? So I think progressively that kind of diminishes within people. This kind of respect is also a thing towards these values, but also, general interest as a result of, I'm not sure, it's something having to do with the quality of man's inner world, so to speak. We always live, we go out into the world and we live, but we oftentimes neglect our inner world. And there is such a thing as an inner world. And I think in the ancient world, there used to be a much greater respect and consideration for this inner world. And this was kind of the bridge between the metaphysical and the physical, the spiritual and the carnal. Um, I think gradually people neglected this aspect for whatever reasons, and they became more and more materialistic, which, prompted greed, envy, lust. I mean, lust is a pretty immemorial thing, but it's been pretty perverse. It's rather perverse nowadays as well, and it started to for quite some time. Um, so yeah, I think it's just a general lack of respect and consideration for other frames of reference for this reality, other than just the purely empirical, observable universe.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that quote. When everybody agrees, nobody thinks, and it's almost as a civilization gets to a point where it's not struggling and trying to figure out how to survive, they kind of stagnate. I mean, you could argue that about the modern world a little bit when you think about the inventions and just the architecture and things that we used to be able to build. Look at Notre Dame Cathedral, and then now we're building things out of flat pack concrete
Sure.
because it's cheap and easy to build. So that art and spirit has kind of been seen as a lack of waste of profit in today's society.
Well, you said it, architecture. In the past, it was much more of a creative act where you would try to design something, in line maybe with nature, or some kind of geometric harmony, whereas, you bring into reality something from maybe another world, in a sense. And the act of building itself has a different value, a different meaning. The architect himself, the builders themselves approach the process differently. And when you take it together and when you have this such a huge project, when it's finished, you have people literally putting out part of their souls into these works, which ends up materializing as sort of an entity. I consider these great works of art as sort of entities unto themselves in a sort of sense, or maybe as a catalyst um, for the metaphysical, I guess.
I,
So yeah,
Perfect. Yeah, I
you know,
think that's wonderfully said. Yeah.
I
And there,
think
there's that quote that um, society prospers when men plant trees that they'll never sit in the shadow of.
for
And
sure. Yeah,
the cathedrals and some of those incredible things that we have built and still enjoy to this day, things like the pyramids, that must have been multiple lifetimes of
yeah,
of people, and that's almost a pilgrimage or a spiritual sacrifice in itself to start undertaking a process and work so hard on it, knowing that you'll never get to sit back and go, "Wow, that looks great."
for
Um,
sure. Yeah.
and I think that kind of sums up the human journey a little as we are now. But so one other thing I did want to touch on, because I'm a bit conscious of your time and I don't want to keep you for ages, is
It's
that
fine. Yeah,
amazing Substack article that you've written, or
yeah,
rather are in the process of doing.
yeah. I
Now,
uh, I will have to. I'll probably update it in the future and add stuff to it because there's a lot of research that I'm still doing. But yeah, if
it's
there's anything in particular that
it's
is like,
so impressive because I mean, like I kind of dropped in before when I spoke to Grant Cameron. He kind of machine gunned at me, as he does with everybody. He just
yeah,
fires this information machine gun, and it's this person in this year said this, and they said, "Oh, you're just curious. What are you going to do with it?" And I was like, and
yeah,
it's fascinating, but it's like being blasted by a high pressure hose. And
yeah,
your work is there in black and white. You can scroll up, you can pause it, you
exactly.
can take a minute to ponder, and it's
That's why I
so
did it.
valuable. Yeah, yeah. But
That's exactly why I did it.
how did you? How did you even start thinking that that was a worthy thing? Because what I'm going to do with this interview is I'm actually going to go through your Substack before or after, depending on which works better.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
this little
sure,
interview to make it a good long video
for sure.
and I'll link the Substack at the bottom. But how did you even start going about this?
Well, there's multiple fields of research within ufology. There's the nuts and bolts aspect where you're trying to learn physics, chemistry, whatever. There's the metaphysical aspect where you're trying to understand, consciousness and how this interfaces with the phenomena and so on and so forth. And then there's the, roughly speaking, the control group aspect, because there's always going to be a control group. I think it's beyond any doubt that there is such a thing as a control group. People just argue about the code names and about the names and about which don't really matter. So, it's an important subject. It's a very sensitive subject. It is an incredibly sensitive subject because, well, these people don't really want to be found, right? And fortunately for us, most of them are by now dead. Some of them are alive, but yeah, so that makes it harder to approach this. But I thought to myself that it's quite important because few people, if any, were actually doing this. And I had quite a somewhat wealthy database, and I was like, okay, can I extract? Can I make something that is decently, put together that will kind of give me maybe it's something like a timeline where I would be able to not prove the existence of such a control group, but just lay it out there, the best kinds of evidence that we have that seems to address that part of the phenomenon, and can I put it in a form in which will benefit people? And I was like, sure, this is kind of what I need to do. I kind of extracted it, and yeah.
It's phenomenal. I mean, it's so granular, and we just like you said, one of the things that so it's hard of me to say one of the things that frustrates me the most, but it is one of the things that frustrates me the most is we are so obsessed with revelations and clickbait, and it's like, oh, immaculate constellation, but then we don't talk about what was in it. The contents. It's just, oh, we found out about Project Stargate, haha, and that's it. So it's so important to see, like you have got transcribed conversations behind the scenes of people, and that's the blood-soaked foundation that ended up being these operations and
For
and
sure,
closed
for
study
sure.
groups. So it adds so much really important context to just hearing about these studies and stuff because there's so many, you get you hear about Thomas Townsend Brown and Operation Whitehaven and all of this kind of stuff, but it's just a letter or a structure of what could be. So it's with the research like yours where you can understand the motivations of the characters and
Exactly.
even their reluctance to even talk to each other.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And then, the more information you have, the better of a picture that you can build. And it's oftentimes going to be long. People have quite short attention spans, generally speaking, nowadays. But this subject is such a complex one. As Richard Dolan says, it's a very, I don't remember the exact way he said it, but it's a very high ceiling kind of subject to approach because of the various machinations of the military industrial complex, as well as the phenomenon itself being quite sneaky, I guess. And but yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Thomas Townsend Brown. I was preparing kind of an edit for the article, and I was just nowadays yesterday and today I was going into Donald Keyhoe's book. I actually have it right here. I mean, I don't have it physically, but it's his book, Aliens from Space: The Real Story of Unidentified Flying Objects. I think it was released in '74, and yeah, a few people know this, but NICAP, the National Investigations Committee for Aerospace Phenomena, was founded by Townsend Brown and Donald Keyhoe.
Okay.
So yeah, yeah, I found it to be pretty interesting, and yeah, in the book, Kehoe has a lot to say about Wright-Patterson and the Air Technical Intelligence Center out at Wright-Patterson. There's a certain they're talking. I actually have it in front of me, so I'm able to just quote it. So there's this. I've been trying to find it, but I couldn't find it. Maybe I will, maybe not. But there's supposedly a top secret estimate of the situation that was delivered on August the 5th, 1948, to Air Force headquarters. And it also reached Hoyt Vandenberg. So famed CIA director and also Air Force general. And this estimate of the situation is pretty important because it was basically saying, kind of confirming for the leadership that some of the craft are interplanetary in nature, and as per Donald Keyhole's account, Vanderberg got this memo and he was like, yeah, we're not gonna use this as part of our official, stance on on UFOs. So basically, what happened afterwards? This was part of Project Sign, I think. This was part of Project Sign, and afterwards, when it became Grudge, it
Grudge.
started to be much more oriented towards debunking. So General Vanderberg started acting as a gatekeeper, I think, because as part of the Majestic 12 lore, he's one of the 12. He used to be one of the 12, so it may tie into that as well. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things, interesting stories in this book. I've just been going by keywords. It's nice to have it digitally. You can search by keywords. But yeah, another interesting account from the book. Actually, I have it right here. It's so in '58. I'll just read it verbatim. It's easier. So in '58, CBS television presented a program devoted to UFOs on its Armstrong Circle Theater show, and one of those invited to appear was Major Donald Keyhoe. Director of the civilian organization NICAP, Keyhoe was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and a former Marine Corps pilot, had excellent sources of information within military circles, and had frequently stated on the air and in his books that the U.S. government was withholding the facts on UFOs to avoid panic. Several Air Force spokesmen were also scheduled to appear, but insisted on seeing Keyhoe's script in advance and asked for assurances that no ad libs would be permitted. Keyhoe was also told that he would be allotted 7 minutes on the program, whereas the Air Force had been given 25 minutes airtime. When Keyhoe's material was returned, all the salient points had been deleted on the grounds that the script was too long, despite the fact that he had carefully timed it. Keyhoe retained just one statement, which is, quote, there is an official policy believed in the best interests of the people not to confirm the existence of UFOs until all the answers are known. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, former chief of Project Blue Book, has confirmed the existence of 4 important documents that should be noted. In 1948, in a top secret estimate, the Air Technical Intelligence Center concluded that UFOs were interplanetary spaceships. In '52, an Air Force intelligence analysis of UFO maneuvers brought scientists to the same conclusion, interplanetary. Um, there is strong circumstantial evidence, but no concrete proof that UFOs are spaceships. So Keyhoe, eventually, he was told that not even this statement could be used by him. The final show was a farce bearing little relation to the program as originally conceived, with the Air Force spokesman concentrating on some of the sillier stories of contact with spacemen. So he was given a heavily edited script, and pretty much nothing of the original message came out. But now we kind of have this. The Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson is a pretty important player because they were kind of the branch of the base that was intelligence, generally speaking, intelligence related. So they had the purview over this subject, and they interfaced a lot with the Battelle Memorial Institute, and they actually had it codenamed Project Stork back in '52, '53, and basically before the Robertson panel. This is a document that Jacques Vallée uncovered. It's called the Pentacle Memorandum. Um, it's quite a controversial memo, basically addressed from one from a engineer from Battelle, his name is Howard Cross, if I remember correctly. And it was addressed to a guy at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they were basically discussing, this was in advance of the Robertson panel. So the Robertson panel would have had taken place, I think, 12th, 13th, 14th of January, '53, and the memo was written on the 9th of January, and it was basically, Battelle was basically telling ATIC that they need to decide beforehand which of the things they can talk about at the Robertson panel and which of the things they can't talk about. And it's basically proof of the fact that Patel has been quite an important player in the cover up since then. It literally says that. Let me see if I have the exact transcript here. Um, yeah, so in the letter, Patel was advising ATIC on future methods of handling the problem of unidentified aerial objects. And they noted that these recommendations would be based on their experience to date in analyzing quote several thousands of reports on this subject. So Patel was telling ATIC that they were had already by 53 analyzed thousands of sightings and telling them that basically there needs to be changes in the way that they handle the subject. But this memo was prompted by the fact that the CIA-sponsored Robertson panel was kind of sudden for them. I think it was too sudden, and they issued this memo, to kind of lay out some base points beforehand of what they would discuss with the panel and what they wouldn't discuss because as we come to know now, there's a lot of very sensitive things about the subject. So this is part of the update that I will make to the article at some point. But yeah, I'll let you know when I wrap
That's
it up.
fantastic. I mean, I think the best thing to do is I'm gonna make a video just literally going through your Substack verbatim.
Well, no,
And if there's anything in future that you think we could have a good discussion about, or
if you want, we could go through it together
that would be
in
wonderful.
a different
Yeah, that sounds
so
absolutely perfect to me. That would be really, really good because it's kind of like I mean, a really good example is when Jimmy on the UAP files interviewed Paola Harris, and Jimmy was like, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this. I'm only saying this from my point of view, not on anything that he said.
yeah, yeah,
But Jimmy was saying, what advice would you give to young people that want to investigate this? And she was like, just read a book. The books are written. But the problem is in this digital age that we're in,
yeah,
you get a server go down or a page get scrubbed or a
exactly.
Wikipedia entry get edited, and all of a sudden this stuff is gone from the internet.
Yeah,
And so I think the immense value of articles like the one that you're writing is that it puts a pin in it for people and hopefully will be a much more
thank you. Yeah.
concentrated research for people in the
Well, look,
future.
this is what actually pissed me off. I've been heavily I mean I've been researching this for about 12 years now, but heavily only for about 3 years, really intensively since a little bit before Dave Grush. So I get pissed off at the fact that many leads just turn up dead sites, dead links, dead sites that you just can't access, or videos that were deleted, taken off, and there's just so much digging that you need to do to find this information. But at the same time, it's kind of rewarding when you do manage to find it. So yeah, this was another reason why I wanted to do this. I was kind of pissed off that it's just hard to find it in the first place, and then never mind about finding some centralized version, even put in a timeline is maybe too much to ask for. But I was like, okay, well, let me dig for it. Now I have it. Now I sort it out. Now I try to make it work, within a framework and just publish it. And I wanted to work a lot more on it, but it was kind of like the kind of thing where if I don't do it, if I don't release it now, I never will because I'm a type of person that oftentimes just uh, I'm too much of a perfectionist, I guess, or something like that. So sometimes I never finish something because I'm not quite satisfied with it. I was like, okay, this is decent enough. This is good. It kind of spans multiple decades. It kind of gives multiple references that people can follow up on. It's kind of long. It's kind of comprehensive. It's good enough. I'll just put it out there and try to forget. I mean, not try to forget about it, but for a couple days, I did want to forget about it because it was kind of like intense brain power required to kind of put it together. But yeah,
I've
yeah,
had that with videos that I've made. Like I don't really cover the hot news because in 2 weeks it can be changed or disproved, or more corroborative information can come out. And I've made, like, I did one on black triangles, and then as soon as I sent it out the door, you find out more information, and I was like, oh God, well I can't delete it, but
Yeah,
and that's so
yeah, yeah.
frustrating. But the beauty of Substack is that you can just keep editing and
For sure.
tacking on. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'll put a link to that for people, but it would be amazing if we can go over
for
that.
sure.
That would
For
be
sure.
really
For
good,
sure.
man. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time today,
Thank
and
you.
hopefully this is the first of thousands of ones that we'll do
For sure.
together.
For
'Cause,
sure. For sure. For sure.
and
Yeah.
in the meantime, if anybody wants to find you, then you are in the UAP Files Discord, so they can jump in there and join in the fun, and subscribe to your Substack, of course. But for now, man, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
very
time.
much. It's been the same.
Cheers.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, man. You have a brilliant day.
And you.